Good afternoon, everybody. This is episode number 70 of the Sports Consiglieres Podcast. My name is Jim Will. I'll be your host. Unfortunately, Jerry's on assignment. Won't be able to make this today. It's our pleasure to introduce we touched on soccer a couple episodes. Our next guest is the executive director for the USL Players Association. And it's our pleasure to introduce Connor, should I say Tobin? So is that a real thing?
I don't know if that's me.
Is that a real thing, or is that?
It's been a long time since I played, so.
Yeah. Well, listen. Thanks for coming on the show on a Friday afternoon, and I appreciate we were going back and forth trying to get this show together, but I just we had the reboot of the Cosmos. The Cosmos were big growing up when I was a youngster. The NASL kind of fizzled out. Then they came over again, and then it fizzled out. And then they were happy to hear that the USL they're rebooted. So that's how we kind of got onto the soccer. And also Jerry is big in the soccer. He talked right before the show that he does coach girls soccer up at Woodbridge. So, but just a little bit background on you. Like, how did you get into soccer, and when did you think the USL needed a players union? I know it's like two different questions, but like, how did you start into soccer? Like, what was your background on how everything started?
Yeah, I mean, from a playing side, I started when I was young, but I was kind of an American kid. I played a lot of baseball. Actually, baseball is probably the first sport I really loved, but had some injuries that made that harder, and so I started to take soccer more seriously. I was a pretty late bloomer, so it wasn't until pretty late in the recruiting process where I even thought it was possible to play in college.
Okay.
I went to college thinking that, hey, I'm here to get an education, but it's cool I'm playing soccer. And then further I got into it, I saw guys making the jump to being pros, and I said, I think I can do that. I did it, and then for being a marginal player, somehow hacked out a career, mostly lower division soccer here in the States. So NASL 2.0, USL. I think one of the things in terms of American soccer, there's always been instability. And like, that is the defining feature. You go back 100 years, that's what American soccer's been. Leagues coming and going, clubs coming and going, which meant the situation for players is always in flux. Because of that, a lot of the workplace conditions and other things in terms of the player experience, quite frankly, are lacking. So you're sitting there like, I'm a pro, but this feels very off. And I think there was kind of a moment where some older players, when NASL 2.0 went away, some of those clubs came into USL, was kind of like, hey, hold on a second. Players should be speaking into what this looks like. And that was the moment that none of us knew what the hell we were doing, but we started unionizing.
Yeah, and then you talk about just the USL itself. I think it started in the 80s as an indoor soccer league. So a lot of these indoor soccer leagues were pop up. So now it came into USL. But like, just get involved in the union. What was what like growing up? Did you grow up in a union household, or like how did that conversation kind of came that we need a union, or like that there was a kind of a void here that. I understand, the turnover to leagues and, a lot of franchises starting and stopping or getting moving and everything else. And obviously the union does create some stability. So what was your personal, first off, it was a huge undertaking. So what was your personal interest in having a players union?
Yeah, man, I don't think I came from a union household. I don't think many of the guys involved with helping create this really came from any sort of unionized background. It was more, hey, like, this is what our reality is. Like, our core group of guys have really led in 2018, going through, we didn't even know what authorization cards were, to be honest with you. We started down the path because a lot of us were saying, hey, if I have a kid, I don't want him to have any of these experiences. I don't want unpaid medical bills that collectors are calling you 2 years later because the club didn't pay on a surgery. Like, things like that should never occur. And that was the motivation. But I would say our understanding or background in unionism, very, very limited. I was probably a little bit further than some of our group just because I had been in NASL and I was kind of flirting around with like, hey, what is the process? But I would say our understanding was pretty much nothing.
Yeah, and then I guess you started. I guess you're founded in 2018. I guess you had recognition in 2019 from the league, and then you represent the Champions League and League One, or are you going down to USL
Yeah.
two?
So when we organized in 2018, I think we got voluntary recognition the end of 2018 for the professional players in USL Championship. During that course of organizing, the league came out and launched, or came out with their plans that they were going to launch USL League One in 2019, and we were kind of on the ilk that we wanted to see the conditions change for professional players. So in 2019, we said, hey, we already just learned how to do organizing. Let's organize that group. So I think we got recognition at the end of 2019 for USL League One. So technically speaking, at that point, we became an umbrella union with two different collective bargaining units. And we actually this last year added to that with the players of USL Super League, which are the women's league that the USL runs. We're actually probably the only professional sports union where we have full integration. Our board is men's and women's players. We represent, again, 3 distinct groups, but now it's about 1,100 players at any given time. We do not extend down into USL League Two because that is fully amateur, and based on U.S. labor law, we wouldn't be able to classify those individuals playing in that league as employees. So it would be hard to actually unionize a group of non-workers.
Yeah. So, I mean, but for just the process, I mean, I guess the core benefits for the union, you had housing, insurance, standardized contracts, you have a grievance process, and medical protection. I mean, I was a union representative myself, and I think one of my friends said when I got elected, like, I'll just tell you one thing you're going to hear is like, you suck, and what's the union doing for me? So, did you find like there was a fight between some of the players? I mean, in your voting statistic, looks like it was overwhelmingly voted yes. But talk about soccer players, you had international players, you had college players, you had kids, players that probably didn't know too much about being in the union. Did you get a lot of pushback from some of the players, or was it very well receptive?
No, I don't think we got a lot of pushback, and I think that speaks to what the conditions historically have been. It was that bad, but I think one of the things that you touch on, we spend a lot of time educating, a lot of times conversing with players. We have players coming in and out of the ecosystem all the time. There can be language barriers, there can be cultural barriers. I think one of the things too, when you organize a workplace that traditionally hasn't had union representation, it's a lot of education, and quite frankly, it's a culture thing around, hey, how does this work? I think over the last 5-6 years since we got to a first collective bargaining agreement at the end of 2021, I think as this became real, people start to see how it worked. It kind of snowballs, and so now you're looking at players coming in, whether they're coming out of college or maybe they're a new foreign signing. It's a bit easier because you're coming into a locker room where there's some understanding. Hey, you have an issue. This is where you go. This is what our rights are. Whereas before, you're starting from zero and you're having to explain it to everyone.
Yeah, and then have you had any collaboration with the MLS players union or any other players union, just as far as like I said, myself being part of the union, just legislation? I'm sure there's different states, different owners that you had to deal with that are so did you have any collaboration with the other professional sports unions?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from the get-go, at least behind the scenes, particularly at MLSPA when we were organizing, was always supportive. I think it's a little bit hard because the businesses from a structure standpoint are completely different, which totally changes kind of hey, what's the relationship between the union and the employer? How do you work through kind of those structural elements? What's interesting is actually the NWSLPA started at the same time. So Yale Overback, who is actually the GM at Gotham, she was on the playing side, and she was helping lead the founding of the NWSLPA at the time. And her and I were talking, again, kind of collaborating
Yeah.
about how to approach things. I'd also say over the last 5 or 6 years at an AFL-CIO end of things, under the leadership of Liz Schuler, who's the president there, and at the time it was DeMarie Smith who led the NFLPA, there was a ton of effort to start to bring sports unions together.
Okay.
So there is an AFL-CIO Sports Council, and that has NFLPA, MLBPA, NHL. Like, we all collaborate. I'm on calls pretty frequently with a lot of them. So I would say between the sports unions, a lot of support, and it's just continuing to improve in terms of lines of communication and best practices and things like that.
And then I guess for an MLS player who drops down to USL, I guess they keep their current salary with the MLS. And then if somebody
depends on the actual contractual situation. So
okay,
you can have different forms of movement. I think in a situation where a player is loaned from an MLS club to a USL club, his contract would still be an MLS contract. So that means it's governed by that CBA. He's technically still an MLSPA guy. But if he ends up out of contract and then signs a new contract, he would fall into our membership. But there's a lot of movement between those things. And I would say there is a pretty consistent line of communication between us and MLSPA.
And then what about if a USL player gets picked up on loan from an MLS player? How's that work?
Again, depends on the contractual situation. Now, typically what you see is like probably the most recent example is the player out of Hartford, Dang, who got sold to Minnesota. Now that is an actual transfer. So when he came into MLS, he gets a new contract that's an MLS contract, and he would transition from being a USLPA member to an MLSPA member. If it's loans, don't typically, we're not having USL clubs be the parent and go, the parent club means that's who your contract was, and you're going on loan to an MLS club. Not to say that it can't happen, but typically speaking, we usually have it the other way, where the MLS club is the parent and they are loaning him or the player to an USL club.
And then I know, like, the Player Association, the Baseball Player Association is used, the Football Player Association is used. Like, outside of the country, there's like the English Premier League. Do they have unions, or like La Liga? Do they have unions? Like, is this a standard across all different leagues, or is this something that's just an American thing?
Yes and no. There are player associations. Like, for example, in the UK, you have the PFA, Professional Footballers Association. Now, and that's similar in a lot of countries. There's a Spanish Footballers Association. A lot of countries have this. Now, what does that association, like, what is their role? What's their legal standing? All those things are affected by local labor laws. So what I would say in terms of like how we think about sports unions, our construct, given U.S. federal labor law, is much different than the vast majority of other countries. There is an international organization, it's called FIFPro. It tries to bring together a lot of the players' associations on common things, particularly when they're trying to push FIFA on legislation. But yeah, it's a patchwork because it's so dependent on, politics and the laws of whatever country we're kind of looking at.
And I guess 2021, you had the CBA was signed. How hard was that, and how rewarding was that for you to finally, from 2018, you guys the players had to go through COVID, where they probably weren't, I don't know if they weren't getting a paycheck, or if they were, weren't working out in the facility. So you definitely had to go through different barriers to get that CBA in 2021. But like, what was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process. I think one of the things that people sometimes don't realize about USL is that USL's model, from a business standpoint, it's completely different than MLS. It's completely different than a lot of sports leagues. I think the construct for most American sports fans, if you follow the NFL, and you buy a team, hey, you're kind of one of the 30 owners that run it. Roger Goodell works for you, and that's the league office. That is not USL's model. USL's model is more akin to like a McDonald's, where, hey, the league itself is privately held. They're in the business of selling franchises. When you're an individual club owner, you buy your franchise, you're really buying territorial rights. You're not necessarily getting a proverbial seat at the table as a league and the things like you don't speak into expansion. You don't speak into the next ownership group and approve anyone, which is very different than the NFL context. When we think about the Commanders a couple of years ago, when they're going through their ownership chain, it had to get approved by the rest of the owners. That doesn't happen in USL, which means in some ways bargaining can kind of end up where you roughly have 3 entities at the table: league, clubs, players. And the dynamics there make this much, much more challenging because there's just an extra level of complexity on how things work and who has control and over what pieces. For example, our direct employers or whoever is your club. Now, those businesses are standalone businesses because they're franchisees.
So if you just go back a little bit, you're talking a little bit about your contracts with the franchise, so basically the
right. So, like, as an employee, you're an employee of your particular franchise, which means that the laws that govern your employment differ because of the locale. So, for example, let's say I get an injury that I'm in a game, I do my ACL. Technically, that's potentially a workers' comp coverage.
Yeah. Sure.
But that workers' comp is going to vary because I'm in New Jersey or Texas or wherever it is. That is different than MLS, whereas MLS is, I'm sure you guys have heard this, is single entity.
Yeah.
I'm actually an employee of the league. Everyone is, so it doesn't matter what team you're on. So, hey, when you suffer an injury, it's running through workers' comp the state of New York because that's where MLS's business is. So we deal with a patchwork in terms of what are kind of the legal basis. So even if you think about, okay, how do we negotiate standards on some of these issues? Well, we have to navigate an uneven legislative environment.
Wow, I mean, that's huge. Is there any talk about that changing? I mean, obviously the union would probably have to agree upon that. And then also, does that also affect like a pay structure? Since do you guys have like a league minimum? Was that something that was involved in the CBA or
that was one of the first things we fought for? I mean, that was one of the foundational pieces of why we said, hey, we need to get to something, because there were some pretty eye-popping things that were happening in terms of how little pay was going to some players. I think that is one of the big drivers around a CBA for us, and one of the big focuses on us as an organization has always been minimum standards and increasing standardization. So no matter what team you're on, as a professional playing in this country, this is what to expect. Now, when we were first doing the championship CBA, we were really focused on that was the line between amateur and pro. So we're saying, hey, essentially, what are those standards to be a pro player in this country? What does that look like? Now that's shifted where that is more our League One CBA discussion, because, hey, underneath that's amateur, and like what are the conditions as a pro that you should expect? And that is one of the focuses that we always have. But it can be very difficult navigating what the business structure of all this is, because it makes bargaining much more complex, because you have more entities involved, all with their own interest. How do you align people? How do we get to yes? It is it was eye-opening going through the first rounds of negotiations. And then to your point that you brought up about complexity, throw COVID in the middle of that.
Yeah, sure.
Brett, that, hey, at least in terms of our direct employers, they're event businesses that are in person. We're not going to be able to have people in person. Well, for lack of a better term, we need a bailout to keep going here. Well, we're coming to players and asking for up to 60% wage cuts or whatever it was at the time. Well, how do you take 60% on players that are living at the margins here?
Yeah.
So it made for a very crazy dynamic.
Yeah, because that's another thing. I guess just doing the research for the shows. I mean, I guess it was well documented. Like some of these players are just playing below the poverty line. I guess when you get to that level, like we had Marcelo Barbeau on a couple episodes ago, and we were just revisiting like the U.S. men's national team and at 30 years MLS, and he said I would play for free. So I think a lot of your players in the USL are obviously playing for the love of the sport, but they also would like to get paid. So, but I mean, is that like how did that come into play as far as the pay structure with that? Like when it like as far as getting into like a minimum pay structure to get people to kind of like as you go up the USL, kind of to increase their wages in order to kind of make a career out of it.
I mean, I think it's pretty typical in any industry, particularly ones
Sure.
that are visible or quote unquote sexy to be involved in. People think, well, that's the opportunity. There's someone else that's willing to take it. And quite frankly, there's been whole industries and businesses built around exploiting that.
Yeah.
And I think some of this piece around defining this and educating people is like, hey, yes, this can be a passion. Yes, you can want to pursue this. But at the same time, if we're going to have a flourishing sport in this country and flourishing businesses, in my opinion, we have to invest in the product, which means from an employer side, you guys cannot look at players as just an expense item and how do I reduce this? Because that leads to churn in terms of players. When we talk about the level of play on the field here in this country, it is inevitable every offseason we get to the number of quality players that leave the ecosystem because it's not financially viable. Hey, that's holding the sport back in this country.
Yeah.
If we want our national team to do better, we want MLS to do better, it starts at the bottom of that pyramid. And quite frankly, on a professional level, USL is that. How do we keep better players in USL for longer? If we make it more of a meritocracy, better quality players in, hey, that threshold of what you have to get to of minimum level, hey, that just pushes everyone. But it takes a foundational shift from an employer perspective of realizing that players are an asset, not an expense item. And just like any other business, when you invest in your product and you do that over a period of time, usually that leads to good things for that business. Unfortunately, how US soccer has traditionally played out, and this goes back, and we can go through a bunch of iterations of this, we have not necessarily looked at players as the product.
Yeah.
And that shift in American soccer still needs to occur, in my belief, if we're really going to flourish as a soccer country.
And then USL, I guess they announced they're doing relegation, and MLS, between the two leagues, they do a playoff system. Do you think what's the union's take on relegation as far as for the players itself? Is it a positive thing? Is it something that you think that playoff system? I mean, what's your take on the relegation aspect of the USL?
Yeah, I know the USL has kind of gone out there and said, hey, we're going to pursue promotion relegation within the USL structure. I think there is some validity to some of the business case. I would say my perspective on this comes back down to the devil is in the details. And from a union perspective, I don't believe that we've had a plan fully articulated to us about what that looks like and how players are protected within that. Obviously, any sort of pursuit of promotion relegation would be a change of workplace conditions, and we view that as a mandatory subject of bargaining. And again, as we sit here today, I cannot tell you from my perspective what that plan is. So it's very hard to say, hey, this is good or this is bad. And I would link that to my previous statement that take out the structure and kind of, hey, we want to come more like the world's game. How do you actually put players and the product first within that system? Or is that just another tool to lure people into this, but we're not really investing in the core piece of what this business is?
Yeah. And it would be interesting because I guess if you drop down, I guess to USL 2, now you're not a professional anymore. You're an amateur.
So in terms of USL's plan on promotion relegation, it does not involve, as I understand it, USL 2. This would just be between professional ranks.
Okay.
But I think things that people don't necessarily think about between these levels, and the fact that right now these are all separate bargaining units, we could have different standards in terms of medical treatment. So what happens when I sign a contract with let's say a championship team, or season doesn't go the way we want, we drop down to this next level, and then, hey, some of the basic conditions, that's not even getting into the pay side of this. We're just talking about, like, what are my workplace conditions? What are they obligated to do in terms of providing athletic trainers or any of these other things? There could be variance. How do we navigate that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge, that because one thing about a union, you want one voice, one membership, and I guess now you're talking about different
You could have different
landscape.
grievance processes theoretically. You could have a bunch of different things here about, again, what do basic protections and understanding from a player perspective look like. Long-winded way of saying is, I think any version of promotion relegation, sure, once we get beyond, hey, this is a nice pie in the sky idea, comes down to what are the details here? How does that actually look? And I will tell you, with where the sport is at, and I still think we're in a moment in U.S. soccer where we need to invest in infrastructure. A lot of these are cost conversations.
Yeah.
And what is balance between, hey, let's pursue this versus what's the reality for the player that's actually having to play the matches?
Yeah, and then somebody's I don't I actually watched some of the games on ESPN on Saturday night, but some of them seem they have nice facilities. Other places are like it's almost like a high school thing. Like if you look at, there's some success stories. I guess you talk about like the Oakland franchise. They had to sell out of 7,000, 8,000 people. So I think that there's an appetite in certain markets, but other markets, and also I guess depends on the owner. Like I said, as a McDonald's franchise, sometimes they don't want to put the investment in the facilities or the experience. They just want, say they own a team and that they just want, they want a return on their investment.
A range of motivations in terms of the individual franchise owners. And quite frankly, again, connected back to why we organize, the range of outcomes from a player perspective and the variance from club A to club B to club D, it was honestly insane. And so when someone comes into this, what is my expectation around this, and how do we get to standards? I believe in terms of what USL is, in terms of getting better players in, increasing the credibility, the image of this league, getting to higher standards. We have some clubs that operate at a great standard that we go and look at and say, for what this is a really well-run football club. And then we have other clubs you'd walk into and say, this doesn't feel professional.
Yeah.
We've got to get that bottom up to kind of a better standard. And again, I think that there is a kind of halo effect around doing this where this becomes secular. But that takes, again, that shift in mentality to say, this is the core product. We've got to prioritize standardizing this across all clubs. Sorry to be long-winded. Okay, what's the pain point here? If we come back to the business structure, even if the league as the franchisor wanted to impose some of these standards, what's their legal ability given the franchise arrangement that they have? We have a lot of friction points in this ecosystem around that structure.
Okay. So, I mean, how beneficial was the ESPN deal for you? And then, like, was the Players Association involved in that deal? Or, like you said, you're kind of like, they had to negotiate with somebody. So you're saying that, like, you have all these different franchises. So how does, like, I mean, MLS has the Apple TV package, but you guys the ESPN Plus. So how was that deal negotiated? And was the Players Association involved in that deal as well?
The Players Association was not involved.
Okay.
Now, my understanding, and again, this is from where I sit, I'm not saying this is 100% it, but my understanding is that the league goes and negotiates on behalf of its clubs. There are certain things that the league is, I guess, empowered to go do. There's a limit to where the league wants to involve the PA.
Well, I mean, I could kind of see that. I mean, but I think it's beneficial for the league. It gets exposure, and also people that want to watch soccer, definitely gives them some sort of exposure, and also gets the players exposure. And with that being said, FIFA World Cup is around the corner. I think tickets open up this week. Do you see any USL team players representing the United States, or any you think that's a possibility? Or
Yeah, in terms of the full national team, I think what's more likely is you'd see some players that used USL as a starting point. So someone like Tyler Adams played for Red Bulls too. That's where he was getting his first professional minutes. I think you're likely to see people with some USL experience that play in it, but maybe not currently in for the U.S. national team.
But not only, I also should rephrase that question, Connor, but also like international teams too.
Yeah.
You see,
some international teams, for example, the USLPA president is Duke Lacroix, who plays in Colorado Springs. He started for Haiti in their last two qualifiers. They just got a big time draw on the road to Costa Rica. So they're sitting in a position right now where they are in with a fighting chance to qualify. And there's some other players in similar situations.
Yeah. And then are you worried about if the league grows? MLS has got some big, you have Kraft, you have, you have Lamar Hunt, you have some big names under it. You feel like this is NASL 2.0 all over again? Any chance that this, if you become too much of if there's too much competition, then you're going to get squashed by some of the bigger players? I mean,
what I would say in this is this sport is too big to have 30, 40, I don't care how many MLS markets you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
That's not going to service this country. There's more players than that. I do think that particularly where sports as an industry have gone over the last 20 years, where everyone's trying to be this international brand and I think you're going to see a rebound effect of that to hyper-localism. I think you go look at the success of somewhere like a Portland, Maine, where they're selling out every game this year, 6,000 people. And I get that that's not a 20,000 number, but I think you can create something that is more meaningful. We can drive an affiliation with something that's more localized. And quite frankly, I think that there is a demand for that. I think people want to feel invested and connected to things. And increasingly, as brands become global, things becomes less personal.
Yeah.
There is a real refreshedness about somewhere like a Portland or a League Two at a Vermont Green, and everyone's wondering, well, why does this feel cool? Well, it's connecting back to what is that local area and what's a local articulation of that identity.
Yeah, very true, very true. And then I know there's some research that you might take on the NWSL, the Women's League, the North American Women's League. Is that something that's out there, or is that kind of like just in Twitter space?
I think that's Twitter space a bit. I mean, I can't speak to the league's intention. Obviously, they launched USL Super League. NWSL, I believe they're at 16 franchises now. Again, look at the pipeline of youth in this country. We have so many female soccer players playing with the college system at the women's game is incredible. Yeah. And then there is not enough professional opportunities in general. So I can't speak to what does it look like between NWSL and USL Super League. What I can say from my perspective is more professional clubs, more professional opportunities for these outstanding players that are in the youth ranks and the college ranks is needed. And I do think that pushes the game forward. So I'm more focused from my perspective of, hey, USL Super League, it's great. We've got currently 9 more professional teams that players can play on. How do we make sure that the standard at those clubs is truly professional?
Yeah. And are you worried about overexpansion for the league too? Like sometimes if too many teams, like I know going back to the Cosmos analogy in the 70s, they were playing Pele, but other franchises were trying to pay their players, but they just couldn't keep up. Are you worried about over expansion with the league, or no?
Well, so League Two again is kind of the amateur piece that we don't spend a ton of time from a Players Association worried about that. We're more focused on the professional properties.
Okay.
I do think the worry from a PA perspective, and we certainly articulated this a number of times, is what is the quality of ownership that is coming in, and are we holding the standard of what is actually professional here, and are we getting groups up to speed? I do have some concerns at times that we do not do a good enough job of vetting people coming in to ensure that they're going to be operating at the requisite standards.
That's fair enough. What would you say your biggest, and I know it's Friday, it's the weekend coming up, and I appreciate your time, Connor. I just want to wrap this up. What's your biggest, you feel, accomplishment that you yourself made or the PA made in this process from 2018 to 2025, where we are now?
Yeah, man, I think in this context, organizing itself, at least from a men's game, I felt like the generation before me that played in the lower leagues, their experience was the same as mine.
Yeah.
Generation before that, same as them. And then for 20 plus years, guys are saying, hey, someone needs to do something. Something needs to happen. I don't think that anyone really understood how hard it would be to get that, even to get to recognition, much less get to a first agreement that actually starts to create standards. I think I take a lot of pride in the fact that we have consistently over the last, 8 years had players that have bought into the fact that I may not directly benefit from this, but I'm going to spend my time, money, energy in terms of paying it forward in the sport and making sure that the next generation of players is better off. I am proud that our organization has gotten to this point. Now, there's still plenty of work to do. There's a lot of things that we have to do as an organization to continue to be able to advocate for that, but reaching a level of sustainability here, I think that's probably the thing I take the most pride in. And to say in that, in the final piece, I would say is our rallying cry when we first organized was this idea of for players by players. No one did this. No one kept stepping into the space and said, hey, I see what's going on. Let me help you guys. We had to do it for ourselves. And I still feel that our group is for players by players. And it's that doesn't mean we're going to get everything 1,000% right. We can't guarantee outcomes in certain situations. But the thing I have said over and over, and then we have a group of players that have bought into this and they operate the same way, absolutely 100%. The intent behind whatever we do will be for players by players. And how do we make sure that players, which are the core of this, along with fans, are placed first in how we go about our piece and make sure that there's balance to how the league and clubs operate.
And with getting back with the World Cup, how great is that going to be for the USL and to have the World Cup here in North America? And with your team, are you expecting a jump in viewership? I mean, obviously some of the revenue is probably going to go up for some of the players and everything else, but how great is it going to be for the USL to have the World Cup here and playing in front of American fans?
I think what I would say, Jimmy, is I think it's a great opportunity.
Okay.
There's going to be more eyes on the game. Every time that there's a World Cup, particularly when it's a domestic World Cup, it's an opportunity to connect new people to the game. And then it's a matter of, hey, what do we do with that? How does that work in terms of the collective? So I'd say, hey, really good opportunity, massive opportunity. My concern is saying, hey, how is that leveraged? How does that benefit people? And how does it benefit all the stakeholders, not just one or two stakeholders?
And then for yourself, you're no longer playing. You're full-time with the union. Is that?
I am. But the world's probably a better place since they don't have me running around on a field these days.
Okay. All right. Well, listen.
I was not a very good player.
Well, listen, but you know what? You've a lot of people find their niche. I think soccer opens up, sports in general, soccer opened up a lot of doors for you. So, I mean, I think that sometimes you looked at a need and there was a need there. So I think that the league is going to benefit overall for what you saw. And I think it's probably to give some sort of consistency. And just being a union rep myself, it's just like if there's a process in place and you understand the process, that eliminates the unknown. If I'm having a family, if I'm a young player, or if I'm going to take a risk and try to play or on my health, or if I have an injury in college, I know that what I'm getting into. If there's a fear of the unknown, some of the players, because I think in this country there's certain gaps that some of the players are not continue on to the professional ranks. They're just kind of after college, they're just saying enough of going to the business world. So I think once they have something finite that they can see, then it's easier for them to say, hey, I want to pursue this, or I'm going to give a chance of my dream or something else. I think for you, it led to the Players Association, which you're starting something good for the whole league. So I think that give you credit for that. So
I appreciate it. I mean, I do think that's fair. I think if anything, it actually extended my career of trying to get this off the ground.
Yeah.
Because I realized, like, from my perspective, and this is, I'm pretty sober about who I was as a player and those end of things, but I realized, hey, I got a lot from the sport. The single biggest thing I can do that far eclipses anything I'll ever do on the field is getting something where players actually have a formal seat at the table, where they can speak into what their experience is at this level. Because I will say I am very resolute that what happens at this level of the sport has a dramatic impact in terms of the trajectory of the sport in this country. A lot of people look at, hey, our national team, why are we not more competitive? Or why is the level of play in MLS not the EPL? To me, the solution is always a long-term solution to some of these things, and it starts at a grassroots level. And in terms of where USL is positioned, in terms of the professional games or professional sport in this country, we're at the end of trying to push that. And a lot of that doesn't always have visibility, but I believe it's essential in terms of this sport growing. So to be able to give back in this way, I agree with you. I was uniquely positioned, and it's exciting to push on that side, but still a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Well, listen, Connor, I can't thank you enough, and I think I'd love to have you come back on when Jerry's available. I know he's in the middle of his soccer season, but thanks for your time. I know we're going back and forth on emails, and thanks for taking time on a Friday to speak to me and promote the soccer in the United States. But I just really can't thank you enough, and I hope that maintain this relationship as the league grows. But as always, this is episode 70. This is produced by Dave Sturchill from Chop Sports Media. So I'd like to thank Connor Turbo. We never got to your nickname.
That'll be the next
one. But definitely. But I'd like to thank Connor Tobin for being on the show. And then good luck to you, sir, and good luck to the USL in the future. But thank you for your efforts, and hopefully it pays dividends for forever. But with that, This is episode 70 in the books. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thanks, Connor, man.